What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over upgrading our pause menu. So just like we did our end of match screen, we need to upgrade our pause menu to support our manual and custom inputs. Now this is all well and good, and we can do this pretty easily because you've seen the methods that we've used in the past, but there's a twist on this one. Pause menu and any menus that are accessed while paused are different than our regular menus. Say we're playing our game, beating up our opponent, all that good stuff. We pause the game. Now, sure, this looks like our menu, okay? And I can do everything that we could do on our other menus. That'll be added in today's episode. But it's not exactly the same as before. So for the other menus, we can just add controls, listen for input. Once those controls are pressed, it finds the resulting function, uses a delegate to actually transfer. You know, this button was pressed. Let's call this event, this function. And then we go and do our logic. For the pause menu, it's a bit different, actually. Because if we're pausing the game, we don't have the ability to listen for a control. The inputs are blocked. Now, we do have a way that we can bypass this in the engine. And then we also have a really convenient way to add all the controls we want without making a bunch of extra events using an interface. Now, an interface, we've used some blueprint interfaces before. We're going to use a code interface today, which you could actually use on all your menus if you'd like, and they are super useful. So we're going to be covering interfaces, setting up all the pause menu controls, and basically just wrapping up our menu flow to this new and improved method that we have, since all of our menus will now use our new images as opposed to the standard Unreal control scheme. All right, and just to show you, I can go into these other menus by pressing a button, just like I can on my other menus. So it's going to be fully functional by the end of today's episode. All right, and so I'm going to close this, and we'll go ahead and get started. But if you'd like to get caught up to the point we are in the series, check out anything we've done or everything we've done to reach this point, I'll link this playlist right here in the top right corner. You can check out everything, every episode that we've made, every tutorial that has got us to this point to show off what we've got and how you can get there. Alternatively, you can go ahead and click this icon in the top right corner right here. And what this is the first video where we did the pause menu before we even did the fancy control scheme stuff. That way you can see how I set this up and what we're going to be building off of today. All right, with all that said, we can go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and go to our widget for the pause menu. So I call it versus pause menu because something like the practice mode can be different. And I go into my pause menu here. Now, I showed this off a little bit last time, but the only cosmetic changes that we have here, I use our custom buttons for this series. So I have on each button, under appearance, style, and then normal, I have my own button asset as opposed to the plain button that we had before the first episode we made. This is strictly a cosmetic change, so if you have your own buttons in here, feel free to use them. Otherwise, this should look the same as the last time we worked on the pause menu. Now, if we go into the graph, there's 3 new events we're going to be working with today, but don't worry about them yet. We'll get into them in a few minutes. So everything we have in here for all of our previous events, like on pressed main menu, on pressed rematch, on pressed command list, on pressed resume, all these are the same as they always have been. Not actually changing anything with them today. I am going to add another event that we can use to call these just for our custom input system, but again, we'll go over that when we get there. And then event construct is really the same as well. I'm going to call one other node just for some cosmetic stuff at the end. But you'll notice that the graph does not change all that much for what we already have. But we're going to add our standard functions that we've added to all of our other menus, which is move selection, determine the button to focus, display the hovered selection, and confirm selection. As always, I will go through all of them, even though you've seen them in other menus. They can change for each menu at little places, and so I'd like to go through the whole process anyway. And also, You shouldn't have to watch the other menu episodes if you only care about this one. So, if you're not familiar with our custom movement system, I'm going to go over it all right now. First things first, we need to make some functions. So we need to make a function for moving the selection, which is how we're going to move up and down in this pause menu. So I click plus function, and I call it move selection for my first one. I also add 2 input parameters. One for the direction we're moving, basically up or down in this case, which is an integer. So it's going to be -1 and 1. -1 is going to go up, 1 is going to go down. And then I have a Boolean called play sound effects, which this is if we should trigger the sound effects on the menu. So when we're moving, we have a sound effect to, play a little movement sound. If we want that to play, this will be true. If we don't want it to play, it'll be false. Okay? And that's pretty simple. So once you've made this function, you've added these 2 input parameters, which, by the way, you can do this by just pressing plus new parameter right here. Then you can go into the function itself, and we'll go over the logic in here. Now in here we're going to need 2 variables that we did not have in the previous episodes. So you can add a variable, and they're both going to be integers, so you can add 2 variables, make them both integers. 1 max selections and 1 current P1 selection. Once you make these and name them whatever you want, you could just call it current selection. I'm calling it current P1 selection in case we ever support 2 pause menus. I've seen games where each player will have their own pause menu. And then max selections is the maximum number of buttons that there are. This can be dynamic. It can change based on how many you have. I'm hard coding it right now because I know what my pause menu looks like. But it's also okay if you want to make this dynamic. And so once you add these variables, make sure you compile and save. This way you can edit their default values. For current P1 selection, I'll leave it at 0. You don't have to change anything because 0 is the top. So in my case, it's going to start on the resume button, which is what I want. Max selections, however, I have to give a default value. The way this works is that max selections is going to be the same number as there are buttons. So 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons. So my maximum number of selections is going to be 4. So I just default it to the number of buttons I have. This way I know how many I can traverse before I reach the end. Alright, and then in move selection, we're just going to basically check and see if the movement we're trying to do is a valid move. So if we're at the bottom and we try to press down, it's not going to let us go to another hidden button down below. And if we're at the top and we try and go up, same thing. We're not going to be able to go up above that value. So the direction, like I said, up or down, is going to be added to the current selection. And we're going to check it against the highest value and the lowest value. First things first. If we have current P1 selection, so you drag it on the screen, and we do integer plus integer, you're going to pass in the direction. And you're going to check if this is greater than the minimum value. Like I said, 0 is at the top. It could be 0. Okay, 0 is the resume button right here. So we don't want it to be greater than 0 necessarily, but it has to be greater than -1. We're not going to let it go to -1. So as long as the current selection plus the direction we're trying to move in is greater than the minimum value, and Boolean, the result of current P1 selection plus the direction is less than the maximum number of selections, then drag it into this branch. Okay, so I did it all right here, but this is the same as this right here. So we check against the lowest and the highest values, and if both of those are true, then we go into the branch saying, yep, this is a valid move, we can actually perform this. And all we do is something really simple. We take the result of the current P1 selection plus the direction and set it equal to current P1 selection. So we're just updating this value based on where we're at and where we're trying to go. Okay, if it's false, we don't do anything, and that's fine. We don't need to play a sound effect. We don't need to focus a different button. Nothing's changing here. So once we set current P1 selection, we've manually done that internal movement, but we also need to display this to the player, because even if we're on the right button as far as the game is concerned, they need to be able to see what button we're hovering. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to move through the menus. Okay, so to do this part now, we're going to make a new function. I'm calling it determine button to focus. So make a new function, call it determine button to focus. This does not have any input parameters, but I do have an output parameter of a button, and it's going to be the current button. This is actually going to return what button we're on, so we can do things like change the appearance for the user to know that it's the hovered button. Okay, so if we move our functions over here, here's the determine button to focus. So go into that function once you've created it. We're going to do a switch statement on the current P1 selection variable. So if you get your variable, perform a switch on int, you get this node. You're going to add as many pins as there are in the maximum selection. Understand that this starts at index 0, not index 1. And so you don't have to go 0 to 4, you just need to go 0, 1, 2, and 3, because there's 4 pins there. There's also a default for in case the value passed into the switch does not fit within any of these 4. Okay. Then all we do is we link each one of these indices to the return node. I'm actually going to add the default now as well to just be resume. If we don't find the value, I'm going to just resume the game. How you do this is very simple. Since we have an output parameter here, we can add return node. Once you do this, it gives you this node that already has the output parameter here, so you just have to pass it a given value. In this case, we need to pass it a button, because that's what I made the current button variable. By the way, to find this output parameter type, you just type in button, and then select object reference on the button. Alright, simple enough. Now we have 4 buttons on our widget. We have resume, command list, rematch, and main menu. Not only are these all buttons, but they should all be marked as is variable. We've set this up in previous episodes, so you probably have this. But as long as you have this, then you can navigate through them. Because we will be able to drag them onto the screen, get the button, and then add it to the return node. Just like that. And so you can see index 0, since that's my top one, I pass in resume button. Index 1 is the one below that, I pass in the command list button. Index 2 is the rematch button. Index 3 is the quit to main menu button. These all link up with their spot on the widget. Okay. Now, we're returning a button that we're going to be focusing. Now that we're ready to focus the new button, that's great. We need to change the appearance of the button to match that. So again, let me organize all my functions. And let's go back to move selection. So we call this function that we just made in here. Make sure you don't forget to call it. Once you call it, you'll have this current button that gets returned. What we're going to need to do is, like I said, change the appearance on this button. So we need another function to do that. So if you make a new function now, I called mine display hovered selection. For this one, it's got only one input parameter. I call it button reference, and it is the button type again. From here, you can actually drag the output parameter on determine button to focus directly into display hovered selection. Make sure you call it here, one after the other. Okay. Now with this done, we can go ahead and call display hovered selection. So we can go into display hovered selection and make this work. Okay, so in this function, what we're really doing here is we're trying to set the button style to be the hovered selection. Meaning, as we move down and we select a different button, we want to make sure the one that is currently selected by the player is highlighted or shown to be a different color. That way the player can differentiate them and know what button they're currently on. And so if they press the confirm button, what actually happens? So here, what we need to do is loop through all the buttons, determine if they're equal to the button reference that we passed in, and if they're not, we want to reset them to the default appearance. If it is equal to the button that was passed in, we want to set it to the hovered appearance. So we can use something called make array to make an array of the buttons we have. It's quite simple. We just type make array, and then you're going to add pin for how many elements you have. We have 4, 0, 1, 2, and 3. The order here doesn't really matter because we are going to loop through them regardless, but I would still go in the same order for convenience. So we have our resume, command list, rematch, and quit the main menu. Okay, that's what we got right here. And I have an array that gets returned. So we can drag off of that and do a for each loop. Now, we don't want to break it after finding one that's equal because we have to reset all the others. So we just want to do a standard for each loop, not a for each loop with break. Okay. So now we have this array that connects to this for each loop. We want to bring our execution pin into it. And we need to check and see if the button reference passed into the function matches the array element. So I have a reroute node here, but actually what I'm doing is I'm taking the button reference, saying not equal to, or exclamation mark equal, not equal. And then I'm passing in the array element for the for each loop. Those are the two things that are being checked. Okay, that's this node. And then we go into a branch. If it's true that they are not equal, what this means is we want to reset it to the default appearance, because the button that is focused that the player is hovering is not this button found in the array. For example, if we are on the command list button, we are not on the resume button, so the resume button should not be hovered like the player is currently selecting it. Okay, so what we need to do here is set the style of the button. Now remember I was just showing you earlier that I changed the cosmetics of these buttons so they have a style, and normal has an image, button bar 1. Alright, so for this button variant 1 here, all I need to do is I need to set the button back to that default value if it's not the selected one. And so you can do this by pulling off the array element, typing set style. You have two, you can use either. I actually like to go right off the appearance with the dark blue one, which is the structure, not the function. And so I'm going to set the style of this widget here. I'm going to split this struct pin. So if you right click on the widget style and then click split struct pin, you get more options. Now, again, I had done this in the normal for the style. So you go to wherever you did it, split the struct pin, and you get this big node. I'm going to delete this one since I got it right here. But you can see it comes off the array element and goes directly into this target. Now it's really simple. All this other stuff you might not have to change depending on how yours is set up. So you can change anything you want in here. But the main thing that we have to change is the image. Since I have a hovered asset, and you can see it looks like this. This is my light blue or my orange. These are my hovered. Since I have those, I have to make sure I'm using the standard one when I'm resetting it. So I just find my button variation 1 and use that as the image. If this is false, so if the array element does equal the button reference, we go into this bottom node here. Okay, so the array element comes down here. We set style on it, but it goes to button P1 selected. And that's this, where it's got a dark black background, but it also has a blue fill. So if I browse to it, you can see it. See, it has this blue outline. Okay. And so this will both set the appropriate button that the player is focusing to the right appearance, and it will also clear the other buttons. All right, there's one other function we need to make here, but let's go back to the move selection function one more time. And let's take a look at our play sound effects boolean. So at the very end, after I've called all these functions and done all this logic, I drag off my play sound effects, and I have some reroute nodes just to make it look nice, and I bring it into a branch. If we should play the sound effects, then I just play this arbitrary sound. I know the tick sound is the sound that I play for the menu movement, so I'm just doing that here. You could definitely make this a lot more complicated and make different sounds depending on different conditions or whatever. But literally, if play sound effects boolean is true, then I go into play sound 2D. Otherwise, I do nothing. So it's as simple as this. Play sound 2D, and then you pick the asset you want. For me, it's the tick sound. Like I said, it's literally that simple. It's not complicated. All right. Now, there is one other function we need to make, which is confirm selection. We don't call it from here anywhere, so you can just go back, make a new function, call it confirm selection. This does not have any input or output parameters. Once you make this function, you can go into it. And then this is the logic I have. So I play a confirm sound right off the bat here. And for this, I don't actually have a way to say, nope, don't play the sound effect. Because we're not going to arbitrarily call this at any point. Anytime we press confirm, we can do the confirm action. And so I'm always going to play this sound. But you could do the same logic if you wanted to and add a boolean to ignore this sound on certain occasions. Now I'm going to do the same switch statement that I'd actually done in the determine button to focus. Okay, this is determine button to focus. So you can either copy this or you can just go into your confirm selection and make a new one. But basically we need to grab our current P1 selection, perform a switch on the integer. So I need to have as many options here as I have buttons. I got 4 buttons, so I have 0 through 3. And then I have the default case as well. Okay, and with this, we can then call functions based on what button we're on, right? Because this is confirm selection. So once we press our confirm input, we want to do the logic that is associated with the button we're hovering. Now, in the other pause menu episodes, I've actually done this in the event graph. Okay, so I have on press for resume, on press for command list, on press for rematch, on press for quit the main menu. What I've now done is added custom events because these on press are for mouse inputs. And if you press like enter when you're focused on a button. But we also want to use our custom input system. So I've added a custom event for each of these, and I've just called it whatever. To keep it consistent, I've just clicked on them and named them like selected and then whatever it was. So selected resume, selected command list, selected rematch, selected main menu. Okay, and so that's pretty much it for this. There's one other thing I want to do in the event construct here, and this is just a cosmetic thing. I would like it to where when we come into the pause menu, we're already outlining the top button, the button we're focusing. That way the player knows that's the button they're on. And to do this, all I do is as soon as the menu is constructed, I call move selection at the end of all the other logic I have, the direction of 0. So the value doesn't change. We remain on 0 as the current P1 selection. We don't adjust and go anywhere else. However, this will then call the other functions in move selection, such as determine button to focus, display hovered selection, and thus it will actually outline the first option. And you can see this here. I'll skip all my menus. Get my mouse off that. You can see that resume was outlined before any of the other buttons. And it's that simple. All right, so this is all of the menu navigation logic done for the blueprint. We do still have some interface logic, and we're going to have 3 events that we have to call our move selection and confirm selection functions from. But this is not done from the blueprint. We're just going to handle them in the blueprint. So we're going to do some interface stuff now, which is pretty fun. The first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to make a code interface. I'm not going to make a blueprint interface this time. So I'm going to show you how to do it. For me, I make a new C++ class. So add new C++ class. I hit none. Okay. I don't use one of the other classes because there's no like standard interface class. C++ as a whole, you can just make interfaces. And so that's kind of the intention here. There is a specific way to make them for Unreal, but I don't believe any of those classes there benefit you. So I like to just choose an empty class of none. Then go to next and call it whatever you want. For me, I called it the widget navigation interface. Okay, and then you hit create class. I've already created it, so I'm going to cancel. Once you create it, you should go into your Visual Studio, and you should have the classes here, or it may even open them up for you already. If they don't open for you, and you can't find them, you may have to close Unreal, reopen Visual Studio. There's a lot of things that could trigger it, or could not, or could stop it from showing up right away. What I like to do is just close everything if I don't get it, and just reopen it, and it's usually there. You just look under the source folder where all your code files are. And mine are widget navigation interface.cpp and .h. So I have both these files up here. Now, for a widget interface, or for any code interface, you don't really need to do any logic on the functions. The point of an interface is that you have functions that you can call, and then those functions or events are handled elsewhere. So for example, if I call this function, like move up, which is move up within a menu, then the menu itself can handle the logic that should occur when move up is called. So I have nothing in the CPP except what it needs, which is this included in the header, because that's how these files are linked. So you don't even have to do anything in here. This is how it'll come already. But widget navigation interface.h, there are some things we have to do. So you should have these includes by default and the pragma ones by default. You can leave that stuff. You might also have the class in here by default, but it depends on your version of Unreal and a few other things. I've noticed sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. Not entirely sure of all the conditions, but regardless, you might have something in here like for a constructor. All you need is what I'm showing here. So if you have anything additional, you can actually take it out. And what we need to do is have a class that associates the code to the blueprints, because we need to be able to access this interface in the blueprint. That way we can grab the events and handle them. But the interface itself is actually this class. So we have two classes in this interface. I know it's weird, but we have this top class. This is just associating this class with a blueprint interface, so we can include it on blueprints. All right, so we absolutely need this one to include it on blueprints. This bottom class is the actual interface itself, the C++ code interface and the functions that we have, so that we can call them and they can be handled elsewhere. Let's start with the top one. So if we have U interface, that's our little macro there. And we want to put minimal API and blueprintable. This is going to be good for performance. And what it's going to do is, again, just let this code be used by the blueprints. Basically, keep track of it for the blueprints. That way they can handle it. They can include it. They can utilize it. Then you need to put class. This is really important. U, and then your class name. The U prefix here is important for allowing it to be seen in the blueprints, because this is a U interface, Unreal interface. All right, so make sure you put the U and then put the name of the class. And then it's going to inherit from public U interface. So colon public U interface. For me, this is red. Sometimes IntelliSense does that. It's not an error. I promise it works. I've built and I'm using it right now. In here, I just have generated body. This is the standard Unreal generated body macro. You don't need a semicolon at the end of it. Note that. You just call this macro and you're good. But we do want to do this so that it can set up everything it needs for this U interface to work. Now that's actually all well and good, but again, we need to add functions that we can actually do things with on this interface. Now to do that, we need to do what I was saying earlier. We need to make this other class. So this type of interface is prefixed with an I. So we want class I and then widget navigation interface, or the name of your interface. I still use generated body to set this interface up the same. I have public so that I can get access to these functions. And now we're just going to add our function list. So I have 3 functions that are U functions. I made the blueprint implementable events because I don't have to define logic for them. I can call them and the logic will be handled in the blueprint. And they're also blueprint callable in case we want to call them from the blueprint character files and things like that. Today we actually are going to be calling it from the blueprint and not the controller. There's a reason for that. I'm going to show it off when we get into the next command list episode. But there is a reason for that. We'll fix that up and we'll get that working in the next episode. But there's just a little hurdle that it would put if we try to do it now. So I'm making it blueprint callable so I can call it from the character class as opposed to the player controller like we will want to do in the future. So I have this U function macro, and then I've copied that 3 times, and I have 3 separate functions: void move up, void move down, and void confirm. Now these 3 functions are what we're going to handle in the menus where we want to use these interface calls. So we can put these on any menus. It doesn't have to be the pause menu. Now there's something weird I actually want to go over real quick, and this is a bug fix, but it gave me trouble after I had set this up because of a small mistake that I made. The include in a CPP file should start, the first include, the top include, should be the same file but the .h. So see basePlayerController.cpp. My basePlayerController was actually my second include, and so it was failing to build at this point. Honestly, not too sure why it popped up now of all times, but it's true. It's actually a mistake that I made. If you go to your other ones, like Fighter Template Game Mode, you see the .h file is your first include. Same with the character. Same with all your CPP files. So if you copied this and you did what I did, make sure you make the base player controller at the top, the first include. All right, once you have this logic in here, you can go ahead and launch the editor again. I have mine open still. And so now I can actually go into, there's 2 things I'm going to need. I'm going to call them from the character BP, like I said, just for today, to avoid that little hurdle that we're going to run into. But don't worry, we'll cover it in the finalizing it and putting it all in code in the near future. But there's another thing we need to do, and that's we need to go back into our versus pause menu, and we need to grab these 3 events to handle them. You won't be able to just grab them by default. You can't just pick them up if you don't have access to that interface. So you need to go to your class settings and look at implemented interfaces. It's under the interfaces section. You can click add and you're going to find your interface. If you set it up correctly, you should be able to see it. Now I already have it added, so it won't show me in the list again because I can't add it twice. But just pick it from the list and it will add it right here. So now I have a widget navigation interface here, and that means I can search for those events, like event move up, move down, and confirm. When you grab these, it will have the from widget navigation interface text. And we can go ahead and set this up now. So it's very simple. For move up, we want to call move selection, the function that we made earlier. Since we're moving up, I'm taking a 1 away, going -1, to move it up higher since we start at index 0. So again, resume is 0, command list is 1, rematch is 2, main menu is 3. So if we're on main menu and we press up, we're going back to 2, which is -1, of direction -1. And I do want to play the sound effects. Event move down is the exact same but the opposite, so we still want to play the sound effects, but the direction is 1, not -1. And event confirm just calls confirm selection. There's no parameters to set. With this, we are done with the versus pause menu. We don't have to change anything else with it. But I'm going to go into my base character BP today and do a little bit of hacky logic until we can set the rest of this up in code, just so that you can see this working and that you know you're on the right track. What I'm actually going to do is grab the corresponding buttons that I want to call these events for. Since we're not listening for input action like we are on other widgets, let's say we go to, real quick, our versus end pop-up. You could see on event construct that we were calling listen for input action and then calling these events. Okay, and we were typing in the action name. Well, we can't do that when it's paused because, quite frankly, the listen for input action just doesn't work when it's paused. It's that simple. It just won't work. It won't listen for inputs when the game is paused. And so that's why we're doing all this other stuff. And what we can do is grab the input actions directly as opposed to listening from them on the character and then call the corresponding interface function by grabbing our pause menu and calling it. Again, it's a little hacky right now. I'll show you a better way when we get into the command list episode. Next command list episode. But this will do the trick for now. So we need to make sure we grab our input actions for the buttons we want to use. You can use the same ones your other menus use, but just so you know how you find them, if you go to Edit, Project Settings, scroll down to Input. Here are all your buttons that you set up. So you just literally search for the name that you want. Menu up P1 sounds like a good one to move up on a menu, so I'm going to use that. Same with menu down P1. And I also have menu confirm P1. So those are the three that I need, so I'm going to bring those in. I just right click in the graph and I search for the name. Menu up P1. Menu down P1. Menu confirm P1. Once I have my three events, I should click on them and I should change some settings. First of all, it's okay if it consumes input right now. That's fine. But execute when paused, we definitely want to check because guess what? The game is going to be paused when we're on the pause menu. So we need to make sure that we still want to execute this event with the game being paused. We also want to turn off override parent binding. This is because override parent binding will get rid of our code bindings or parents of this character blueprint bindings for this event. And we don't want to do that. We may use these in the code or in parent blueprints, and we don't want to stop them from working just because we have them in here. So disable override parent binding and execute when paused, mark that as true for all three of these events. Now, last thing we need to do is get the pause menu. You could either create a variable, keep track of it like we did for the command list widget, or you could just simply get all widgets of class. You could select your pause menu versus pause menu. And then you could drag off of this and type get a copy, and use index 0. There should never be more than one pause menu at a time. If you have a bug, you could technically miss one of your pause menus, but we should only ever have one pause menu at this current time, since both players don't have their own. And so this little hack will work just by doing this. You don't have to get a reference to your pause menu. I copied that and I did that for all three events. And for each of them, we're just going to call the corresponding interface call. So if I go to my class settings, you can see I'm not including my widget navigation interface. You don't have to include it where you're calling it from. You only have to include it where you're going to handle it. As long as you're calling, as long as you have a reference to the object that includes the interface, you can call the function. So you can see here my output on this get is the versus pause menu. So if I drag off of this, I can call any of the interface functions. So this is menu down P1, so we want to call our move down. You have three options. You can call the function directly, and you'll get this little yellow node. We actually don't want that one, because that's calling it directly on the versus pause menu. You could do that, but it's actually better to call it through the message. If we do the interface call, it does call directly through the interface like we want, but then we're not actually utilizing the pause menu here. So the best case for this right now is to just use the move down with the message. And you'll see the node is blue, and that's the one we want. Okay, and probably don't have to show it, but since we're here anyway, drag off the next one, and the next one is menu up, so we want to call move up message. Last one's confirm, so we want to drag off the pause menu and type confirm. We want confirm message. Okay. Now, once you do all that stuff, you should be good to go. You can go into your game, select your characters, play it, skip your stuff, pause whenever you'd like. And at this point, you can see that I can navigate freely through my menus, only the buttons that I have access to. I can press the confirm button to actually follow the logic. I don't have to press enter like I did before. I can actually press my confirm button. So I can use my custom controls, I can use my controllers, or my other inputs. And all these buttons will work, as long as you set them up correctly. And they should navigate fine. Even though the game is paused, you should be able to see all these navigating perfectly fine, because we are using the interface and the character to execute these functions, not listening for them on the widget. Alright guys, so with all that done, we've actually completed the episode on the upgraded pause menu. So if you enjoyed this episode and it helped you make your pause menu better, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to all my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for everything. Really appreciate all the kindness, and it really keeps me going. I'm so excited to work on these series week after week, and I'm glad you guys are excited to check them out as well. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you, get you sorted, get you moving along with your game, so you're not stuck. Anyway guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.